I have one apology, which is Councillor Bond. I assume there are no others.
Moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest that we don't already have recorded? There being none, we just move on. We have a public forum today, councillors. So we have a couple of speakers coming forward. And for those that are going to speak, just to explain the process, 5 minutes per speaker. So if you have two, that'll be 10 minutes. I'm reasonably flexible on the time. I'm not going to hold you to the exact moment, being mindful that councillors may well want to ask you questions after you've presented. So allowing some time for that would be great. So if the first public forum speaker would like to come forward, that would be great.
I'm here today along with all my whānau and colleagues around the discussion that has brought us to the table.
Sure.
I am a ratepayer. Okay. I am a ratepayer. I am a mother. I am a wife, and I'm here. I also am Māori. I'm a nurse, and I'm here today because I want to make sure that I'm born and raised and I have a voice in our community. We have so many struggles, but we stand in the light of our tūpuna. Being Māori is because of our whakapapa. We do not choose to be Māori. We choose not to be racist, no unconscious bias, and no institutionalised racism or interpersonal racism. But that is a choice we choose not to do. But being Māori is not a choice. It is our whakapapa that brings us here today. Moana Jackson again talks about the struggles that we have for all of us. We do stand in the light of our ancestors, of our tūpuna. People will not remember us for the things we do or the things we say. They remember us for how we feel. Kia ora.
Kia ora mana tātou, ki te mea kia tātou whānau, tēnā koutou katoa. Ki te mea kia tātou aramanā ki te kaupapa o tēnei rā. Te kaupapa te reo Māori, wharipaku wahine tāne. What's wrong with that? Nothing wrong with that as far as I know. However, these things like we have too much to say, or you know, I don't know where that comes from. To me, tautoko te wahine here, our tūpuna over here. You know, I'm an Irish Māori. I'm proud of both heritage. I'm proud of this place. I'm a Bluff boy, Chatham Island boy, and I was born on the ocean in Christchurch, coming to Bluff. So they had to register me in Christchurch. That's why I'm a Crusader fan as well. But anyway, besides that, te reo Māori and everything that we do on the marae is paramount for us as a people. We learned English, okay? We had to learn English because we were told to in our schools. We're not asking you to learn te reo Māori. We're not telling you to learn te reo Māori. We're telling you, how do you say things like tuatapere? You must be pretty pissed off because there's a whole lot of places out here named in te reo Māori names in this Murihiku. Even Murihiku. I mean, for God's sake, why hopai? What is your problem? Why do you beg us? Why do you give us a hard time because we're Māori? We're not any Māori, we're mana whenua of this area. Why are we mana whenua? Because we were here before you. Long time ago. I just think you need just to wake up a little bit, shake your heads and think about it a little bit, and then I've already sent down an invitation for you, this council here, to come to the marae and have a kōrero, which would probably happen, hopefully. I don't see why not. You know, it'd be really good to put your foot on the wharenui and walk through that whare and come in and sit down and have a cup of tea after we have our argument. I mean, I'm not going to feed you before that, that's for sure. But anyway, our sole purpose here is not is for you guys not to take here the mana of not especially down here, Naitahu, or the mana of our people. Our people stand proud and tall. I was with a meeting this morning with our kaumātua. If they were here, you'd know what I mean about strong wahine, because they'd be all up talking. And I'm sorry, Nobby, you wouldn't even be able to shut them up. I'm telling you now. But anyway, besides that, I'm here, I'm part of this group here, and a whole lot of us here, to say to you guys that, no, enough's enough. Don't cause divisions between the town. Do not cause divisions. You know, that is just the wrong thing to do. We need to be one. A people all one here in Mirihiki. Nō reira, ki te mia koutou whānau, tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa.
Tēnei te mihi kia koutou katoa, ko maunga pohatu te maunga, ko ohine mate ro te awa, ko te tōtara te marae, ko nai tūhoi te iwi, ko Tony Biddle tuku ingoa. I've been asked in the last 5 minutes, 10 minutes, to speak on behalf of my whānau, Māori whānau, part of our community, your community, the community that you serve at this table. And so today I would like to speak to a notice of motion that has been put up by our mayor. That is awful. It is sad. It is very sad today that we have to come here to have this kōrero with you. When I read the notice of motion, I felt real sense of aroha and sadness. I thought about my father, who was born Apiri Hama Biddle. That was the birth name that he was given. But no one could pronounce it. So you know what they did? They took it away from him and they called him Bruce. And he had that name for the rest of his life until I received his birth certificate when he passed at the age 80 and learnt that his name was Apiri Hama Biddle. And you today have a decision to make whether you take our te reo away by choice. You are taking the choice from us. Bilingual names on buildings is not satisfactory. If the council wants to name a building in te reo Māori, they should be allowed to. You should be allowed to. And we shouldn't have to come and fight here for that. Not today, not ever. This is divisive to our community. As a previous deputy mayor and a councillor who was sat in this room, I am absolutely disgusted. I'm shaking, I'm angry, and I'm completely sad. And each and every one of you, please look at me when I speak to you. Don't look away. Don't look away at me. Don't look away at me. I know that you are good people. I know you're here trying to do the best. Don't divide our city. Please don't divide our city. Turn this notice of motion down and let the normal process continue as it is. It's unnecessary, it's unreasonable, and you're only going to cause more division for our people who are going through enough already. Racist undertones from councillors, from mayors, from governors, from leaders is unacceptable in our community. We are not one people. We think differently. We have different values. We have different people. We have different ways of processing things. Please, elected members, I am asking you today, please do the right thing and vote against this motion. Tēnei te mihi kia koutou katoa, nō reira tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Kira me te whakaitea whakahoki nā mihi nā kaupapa o te rānei. Tēnā koutou te whānau, kua tai mai, kia tautoko tēnei kaupapa. Tautoko o te kōrero, o nā kai kōrero a mui a hau, he kaupapa kore take. He kore take no te mea, e kore he whakaro tahi, he whakaro kia wehia te whānau Māori, te whānau hāpore Pākehā. Nā reira, he tū ki runga te aroha, a ke mihi ki a koutou mō koutou tautoko, kia ho atu nā kōrero te whānau, mō tēnei pepa, kore take. Pepa kore take. No te mea, e kore nā mana, nā mauri e roto i tēnei pepa. Ana reira, ko tēn whānga hau, kia tū, kia mihi atu ki a koutou, kia ho atu nā tōku whakaro, te whakaro o kaitahu ka te māmoe waitaha, ki a koutou. Ana reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou. The very fortunate thing about our people down here in the south is that we are very lucky and fortunate to have such strong mana wahine amongst us that are able to voice in eloquence their thoughts. And I've just kindly turned to you that have spoken before us and just say, yeah, we're very disappointed in the approach being taken by the notice of motion penned by the Mayor, by his worship. And the reasons being is that it feels like it's a paper that hasn't had input from iwi, your partners, and that's why I stand as your partner to say, where is the partnership? There seems to be division amongst us, and we're deeply concerned about that. So I do wish to speak to the notice of motion for the council to adopt bilingual approach to any naming of the civic building. It is hard to understand why a community or its members of the community are concerned about an uncoordinated approach to the naming of civic buildings. Bullet point number 1 talks about some buildings having an unequal focus on te reo. I'm not sure, community concerns highlighted by an unequal focus on te reo. I'm just looking at some of our buildings around town, and I look at He Wakatuia. It's a beautiful name, and it talks about emphasising the value of unity. And I also turn to another name that was brought up more recently called the Waka Kotahi. And it's also a name that's used for unity. Unity around things and processes that we have within the wider Aotearoa context. We're going to do things together to make things safe. And that's what we talk about when we talk about a waka. We're doing things, we're rowing our waka together. It's not about division. Point number 2 is that some naming has initial name in te reo which creates confusion. There is no confusion around te reo Māori names initially coming first. Our children in our schools and kura can testify to this. They understand the uniqueness of languages and Māori and English languages. They don't have a bias. Our children don't have a bias. Going through schools, we learn about Māori and we learn about English, and there is no confusion for our youngsters. So they're an example for us. That some te reo names are not related to the nature of the building or what service it provides to the community. Example, he hinake is eel pot in English. The real names beautifully describe uses of buildings and their place on landscape. Hinake is an example. Hinake waihopai, the place of plenty, a place of resources, a place for well-being of people. And I can see the beauty in the way that we poetically describe why these names are brought to the attention. And some people, and I read in the paper that they're gifted. They wouldn't be gifted unless there's a real understanding that everyone agrees that they really are going to serve their purpose for our civic buildings. And I look at when the gifting of names, they are discussed previously with all the parties when names are gifted. We wouldn't want to gift a name that's thrown straight back at us. It's unity. It's talking about things together, and why we gift names. And gifting names is not done lightly. It's not done lightly. There's a lot of reflection, a lot of thought, and that's the reason we gift names, to help support our relationship, our partnership. The recommendation process, I think, without repeating them all too much, I believe that the recommendation process, all the bullet points, they need to be redone. They need to be done in partnership with your iwi partners. I had gone through the whole lot and then said, well, they need to be worked on. They need to be worked on together. And I totally disagree with the bullet point that says that council does not approve metaphorical names in Te Reo. That means names that denote something not relevant to buildings or service provided. Example, Hinaki for the Civic Building. And the reason I totally disagree is that we have to look at our National Museum, Te Papa Tongariro. And so these are fine examples of the use of Māori language to denote such a beautiful building, an iconic, a nationally important building, which is Te Papa. And when I look at the bilingual name displays, I think it's a case of bilingual displays are a bit of an art, and you leave those sorts of the way that they are interpreted and the way that they're designed to the experts. And they need to be designed with their partners when they are partner signs. So I'm not concerned. I'm really concerned about why our language is now being put second. We are First Nations people. The language of Māori has been heard for 800 years on this landscape. We are not new to this landscape, and therefore I do not understand why having names first and seconds in Māori would naturally come first as being the first language on this earth. I'm also extremely concerned about some of the recent statements made by His Worship at previous hui regarding Māori and iwi relationships. I implore the Council to seek iwi, your partner's advice before proceeding, therefore not adopting a biased opinion in regards to this topic. Kia ora koutou, thank you for hearing me.
So, questions, councillors? Oh, sorry, Leslie.
Kia ora, Dean. Kia ora. Thank you very much for what you have said. Dean, I wanted to ask you a question. As well as the notice of motion in the agenda today, there is, just past that notice of motion, a guidelines paper on bilingual signage guidelines from Te Puna Kauperi. If the proposal today had been that this council adopted that paper, and I'll just point out for you, because you may not have been able to read it, that that paper is extremely well researched, it's tried and tested, it's been adopted by other councils and by central government. It was brought into place in 2016 when Te Rua Flavell was minister. It has been active since then. It's a set of comprehensive principles. It deals with all the bases of appropriate consultation with the local iwi, style, quality of languages, placement of languages, etc. If the proposal today had been to adopt that paper, would you have been comfortable with that as a way of moving forward on our bilingual journey in this area?
It would have to be a personal opinion, but I would probably say yes, because it's been designed and by knowledgeable experts in the field through obviously quite a considerable amount of consultation. I would imagine that would have been the process. So having not read the paper fully, or that would probably be my only comment.
Thanks, Dan.
That's something that's well prepared, well engaged, would be something obviously that the members would have to agree with, but we would probably, personally, I can only say from a personal perspective, that sounds like it's a paper that could be referred to adopt.
Thank you, Dean. I'll also point out and ask you another question. Part of that paper does show that there was international research done. including basing parts of the paper on the experiences in Wales, and I think you'll all be aware of the revitalisation of the Welsh language, and also the experience with Scottish and Irish language revitalisation. Does that make you and others more comfortable that that would be an appropriate paper that's used appropriate examples of how revitalisation of language could move forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I would, you know, when we talk about, we've come from Māori, from our Pacific roots, but we also, some of us come from British roots or United Kingdom roots through our Scottish backgrounds and all that. So, and you can see that those roots are deeply tied to the Celtic ways of life and the Celtic language and all that, and the Welsh and the Irish languages are all dual signage over there. So I'm not understanding why there would be a problem for us to have Māori across, because there is a real imbalance. There is not too many signs out there in our community that are that have Māori on them where they should. So we're saying that there's an imbalance or that we're seeing too much Māori. That is definitely not the case. There is to grow our Māori language, our reo, and for it to be true partnership, there needs to be so much more. Just like you see in Ireland, just like you see in Wales, where that's part of the law. I don't know why it's not the law here. And it appears to be going that way, but I'm not sure why people would be opposed to it. Because you know, there's a directive, natural direction around revitalisation, because there's a lot of people in our back that have that more expertise around the reo than I do. But to grow our reo, it's part of who we are. It's part of this country.
Thank you very much, Dan.
Yeah, Tom.
Dean, one of the things that you said that particularly interested me was when you talked about the gifting process, and yeah, I'm paraphrasing, this is not your exact words, but you sort of said, well, as a two-way, there's a consultation involved. You would not gift something that was inappropriate. And I think, you know, one of the issues that I personally have with metaphorical names is that metaphors don't often work well in two languages. Now, when I look at tu anua, it does work very well actually in both languages. When I look at tuhanaki, I don't think it does. So I was interested, and my understanding was, and maybe I was completely wrong, my understanding was that name once gifted, you know, like a tablet of stone from heaven, from Mount Set, you know, that there was no consultation. I mean, it seems to me to be different. I feel about it differently. If it's a consultation where, you know, you might say, look, here is a te reo name which we think is appropriate, and on the other hand, we might say, well, actually in English, you know, eel means slippery and devious and cunning, and it's not really actually a. I mean, I think that kind of process would make me feel a lot more comfortable about, you know, the gifting of metaphorical names.
Well, there's two ways. There's the Māori explanation of words. There's a Māori explanation of words, and you're probably going to have to accept that that's the way that Māori describe that particular word, and the the metamorphic understanding of that. That's the way we do words, and that's the way we might name something. And then there's English. I'm pretty sure that sometimes they won't come together, and there's no need for them to come together. They can sit separate. And the reason it's gifted, and then the reasons behind the word will be explained, you know. And you will, then someone might say, an eel's a slippery beast, but it provides sustenance. But that's not the reason the hinaki was gifted. And obviously it was a process that went through. I understand there was a process that went through. This is about well-being. This is about talks about this place as a whole, about a place of coming together. Very much why I understand that that name as a name.
So a second part of that.
It's about coming together, resources, a place like this.
So a second part of that question, maybe, Dean, I'm sorry cutting you across you, but I did hear you talk about, you know, the need for dialogue before a name was actually gifted, and that would make me feel an awful lot more comfortable, because sometimes there can be a misunderstanding in the names because it means something in a metaphorical sense completely different in English than it might do in Maori, and if there was consultation about it, you know, in advance of that gifting, I would personally feel a lot more comfortable with metaphorical names.
Point taken. Yeah.
Grant.
Yeah, and one would imagine, I understood that there was, so, because we're through that particular name.
Yeah, thanks, Nobby. Yeah, Dean, firstly, thank you for going through and taking us through the paper, because it's been very insightful. The key thing I would take out of it is that probably two things, you know, the need for consultation and the need for partnership. But I just, you know, when you just said there before in response to Tom's question around the different meaning within the language, different languages, and you know, the English version may just have to be accepted. So even though we may not be comfortable with it because it means slippery or something else, we have to accept it. So I just wanted to check that, you know, when we talk about partnership, it would be an agreed partnership. It's not acceptable to one side, then we have to go back to the table and get acceptance. Or is there a partnership, but it's going to be dominated by one party? So I just want to get some clarity on your thinking around that.
Saying that, what we're hearing is that there's a need for partnership. There should be already an existing partnership with the Treaty of Waitangi, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And to say that we need a partnership, it should just be in everything that we do, and so there isn't a need, because it should be what we're doing. That's what the treaty is all about.
Yeah.
So I definitely understand that there's the English version of translations where it says there's Māori. You just got to accept that there are two, and the reasons that the gifting of names and the Māori reason for gifting of the names are inherent. It's not gifted lightly. There's going to be something beautiful within that name. So that's about all I can say, Grant, is that partnership should exist, and we should accept it.
But
these.
Is there an opportunity through that conversation in your mind, or the way you see the process, where if it's not accepted, then there's an opportunity to go back to the table, or does it just have to be accepted?
I would have thought the early part of the early consultation would be work out whether a name's appropriate or not.
Yeah.
And I understood that did happen.
Yes. Right.
And some of the names, because you wouldn't want to.
You got it.
Enforce a name on somebody.
Yeah.
Generally, through most of the names that I understand, that they have been talked about.
Right.
And I wouldn't understand why partners wouldn't engage in that process.
Well, it's logical, but sometimes logic doesn't prevail, does it?
Barry.
Yeah, I've had a problem for a long time with Te Reo being on top of the English word on buildings, and sometimes it's not even on, the English version isn't on buildings.
What's the question?
We were all taught English in school, as you were, and I have a bit of a problem. In fact, I have a lot of problem with.
Excuse me. Can you just let him have his say?
So that's why I've got a problem with the Te Reo name being at the top, because we get tourists coming into New Zealand, and excuse me, I'm talking. We have tourists coming into New Zealand, and they look at a Mary building like the one next door, or a museum, and they have to ask someone, "What is that building?" That's crazy, as far as I'm concerned.
Yep.
Maybe it was a reflection on our education system back in the day, that our parents shouldn't have been ostracised or strapped like my father was for speaking the language at school. So there's those things that Te Reo should have come through the system right from day dot. But there are stuff in our past that we shouldn't be proud of when it comes to the and how Te Reo was wanting to be subdued in the past. So I understand your point, Barry, but so I just, when we were growing up, the same thing, we were taught English first, but that's no reason that it shouldn't have been like that. It shouldn't have been like that. We should have.
I haven't got a problem with.
Hang on, Barry. No response.
Now it's there's our language learners, our language teachers are coming back, reinforcing our language. So I go to overseas, and it's not an expectation, but I always go to Hawaii. The Hawaiian language is everywhere, and that's part of my visitor experience. Going on a holiday over to Hawaii, that all the names over there are in Hawaiian, and I look at them and I think, I need to work that name out because it's a beautiful name. I just know it's got a beautiful meaning. I need to work that out. So that's part of my visitor experience to a country. Is trying to understand people's language and their culture. Language is a big part of it. Language is a culture. Language is our culture in Aotearoa. So it's yeah, that's all I can say.
Just on that note, Barry, Councillor Barry.
Yeah.
Just on the te reo and all that sort of thing. I went to a Catholic school down Bluff, and there was no Māori spoke there because they weren't allowed to speak it.
Yeah.
But they were very happy to get us up to sing a waiata. You know, to sing a Māori song. So hey.
Yeah.
What the hell?
Yeah.
Gotta.
I've got nothing wrong with that.
No, we're not going to have any more debate because we're actually we're just posing statements at Dean and Cyril, and that's not what it's about. You're meant to ask questions. So I'm going to have to the end of this. Now, for those who are not familiar with how we work, sorry, Trish, did you want to say something?
Well, it's not really a question, but I did want...
Being mindful that we do have a debate section to come.
Yes, I did want to say that it is an educational journey we're all on, and we're at different places. So the partnership needs to understand that. While it may be difficult what some people think, you have to be mindful that we're on a different pathway, or on the same pathway but a different place.
So the process from here on in, for those that are in the gallery, and Tony already knows this, we're going to work our way through the notice of motion, which is tab 12 for those councillors around here, because I think it's appropriate that we don't leave it till halfway through the meeting to continue to do this. So for those who have not been through a notice of motion process before, and for those in the gallery, this is the way it works. We have a notice of motion put forward. The mover and the seconder get some chance to speak to the motion. And then following on from that, we'll consider the paper that's been put up by my learned colleague behind me. Or sorry, it looks like Andrew's going to do that at one stage. But that will come after the mover and seconder have had their opportunity to speak to the motion if they want to. Then we'll have a general debate. Following on from that, as part of that general debate, the two iwi delegates will have the right to speak first. The mover then has a right of reply. And then we will put the motion, and democracy will come into play. So, as the person that's put the motion up, I'll move that the motion be put up.
No second, Chair.
Thank you, Tom. So the process now is I'll speak briefly to that paper, and I won't go through the paper that was attached to the motion unless there's somebody in the gallery that wants me. Sorry.
Point of order.
Yes.
Before you before you move the process any further,
yep.
I want to invite you as the mover to alter your notice of motion so that the words "in accordance with the attached paper"
yep.
are replaced with "in accordance with the Māori English bilingual guide" as appears at 12.2 of our agenda. I'm inviting you as the mover.
Yes, well, let me respond to that before I make a decision on that, because that was put to Dean earlier on about whether he would accept it, and I was loath not to interject at that stage because I think there were some traps in there for Dean to say, which he did say in good faith, that he would accept that document that came out from the Ministry of Maori Development because it has some traps in there. So it is it is a set of guidelines for the government and the government only, so it's not for non-government agencies, and it has some conditions in there that I don't think would favour the voices that we've heard today. So I'm opposed to adopting that Maori English bilingual guide from the government.
Excuse me, Mayor, just a clarification on what Councillor Soper was asking.
Yep.
From what I understand in your notice of motion, the statement in accordance with the attached paper is actually your written words, is
Correct.
the attached paper?
Sure.
Okay, so that's right. I just want to make sure that that's what's being referred to.
Sure.
So I'm sorry if that is your decision,
Sure.
Your Worship.
Yep.
I think that is unfortunate because that comprehensive paper would have made a very worthwhile contribution to this debate today, and I'm very sorry indeed that we are in the situation where we are now going to debate the notice of motion of you as you have put it forward.
Yep, and I hear what you're saying, and that paper that's been put forward by staff, which discusses that document, which I've got a copy of here, will be discussed as part of the open debate, and it will inform councillors what position they want to take at the end. Now, the bottom line is, if you don't like my paper, you vote it down, and that leaves it open for you to have an alternative. But I wish to have the initial notice of motion as it stands. So, as the mover, I just briefly want to find out from the gallery whether they are familiar with the paper that's attached to the notice of motion. Is anybody not familiar? Tony, that's a yes or a no? They're not familiar? Okay. I'll read it out because it's only a relatively brief document, and then I'll speak to that. So it relates to the naming and renaming of civic buildings. It's not related to signposts around on the roads or anything like that. It's purely to the civic buildings. Background, there's been concern within our community that we have no coordinated approach to this issue. Council needs to have a clear process on these issues, with neither English or Te Reo being dominant but dominated by the other. The community concerns are reflected by, and there are 5 bullet points, which Dean referred to. Some buildings have an unequal focus on Te Reo, example, He Wakatuia. That some naming or renaming has the initial name in Te Reo, which creates confusion, and an example of that is He Tehanaki Civic Building, so people don't know what that is. That some Te Reo names are not related to the nature of the building or what services provided to the community. Example, Tehanaki is eel pot in English, and that creates confusion. That the use of Te Reo requires a hapu or runaka input and approval. Example, that the use of Te Reo requires a hapu or runaka input and approval. An example is that we struggle to get tāne or wahine into English around some of our facilities on things like council toilets. And once a runaka gift of a name has been done, it has to be accepted. The following process is a way of all parties, including staff, being clear on how council wishes to approach this issue to avoid ongoing unease in the community. The recommended process is as follows. The council has the right to take a bilingual approach to the naming and also the renaming of buildings to promote the use of Te Reo. That renaming under this bilingual approach should be on a case-by-case basis, taking into account the historical heritage. That historical heritage to this city is a combination of European/Scottish and mana whenua. This leads to not taking a bilingual approach on such heritage venues as the Scottish Hall, the ICC Debating Chamber, the Civic Theatre and the Eve Pool Civic Library. All new premises should have a bilingual approach, examples our new museum and proposed new art gallery. That Te Reo names that are not unique to the specific venues should be promoted should be promoted without runanga input. Example, if we wish to have toilets in the Queen's Park to include wahine and tāne, that we should have an ability to do that. That council does not approve metaphorical names in Te Reo. That means names that denote something that is not relevant to the building or service provided, e.g. Tehanaki on the civic building. Bilingual name displays. That where bilingual naming is used, the English version should be displayed first by Te Reo and followed by Te Reo, giving the very small number of Te Reo speakers that are available. I'll speak to that in a minute. That the signage of each display is equal, i.e. one is not larger than the other. That the font may afford some differentiation if that is wanted, and the same for colour. For argument's sake, if we had the ICC Civic Building hyphenated Tehanaki, the Tehanaki could be in a different font if that was wanted, and also in a different colour to denote that it was Te Reo. That the naming and display of criteria is also reflected on promotional letterheads, community engagement, and online. So that's the backdrop to the motion. And the reason for that is, as Dean quite rightly said, we have too many buildings that have just single names on it, most of them English. And it would be my wish that we have, wherever possible, a bilingual approach. It seems to me that there are examples of where English is used and it's maintained forever and a day. Our evolving community is towards a bilingual approach, and the documents that we're about to discuss from the from Te Puni Kōkiri suggest just that we need to promote te reo. And so it was my view that by having this standard policy, we'd have an ability to rename wherever we could buildings with a joint name, as opposed to just having the European name that's traditionally been there. And also going forward, that where we have new buildings, that we would also have a bilingual approach as well. So that was my driving force for doing that. And that's all I have to say on the matter. Tom, as the seconder, do you wish to add, or do you wish to wait till
please, Mr. Mayor. Look, when I read this, and I guess it depends what eyes you read it through, but I mean, I saw the fundamental purpose of this paper being to extend the visibility of te reo in the city to a greater extent than has ever been seen in Invercargill before, by having nearly all city-owned buildings given bilingual names. Now, I think we should all support that initiative. And frankly, I think we should recognise your role as Mayor for bringing this to this table for the first time in the city's history. But the paper also proposes a protocol for how that policy should be implemented. And that is actually the far more contentious part. Mr. Mayor, I've lived in 3 other countries which use bilingual signage: Canada, Wales and Scotland. Lived in each of these for a number of years. And in all of those countries, it was introduced with the very best motive of bringing different language communities together. But actually, if anything, resulted in increased division and acrimony between those cultures, at least initially. The most divisive issue always is which language appears first, especially which is on top and which is lower on the sign. Just those English words I've used, top and lower, illustrate the issue, because it is perceived, often subconsciously, as a symbol of cultural dominance or cultural subservience by members of both communities. Whether it's French English, Welsh English or Gaelic English, the ordering of words becomes a deeply emotional issue for both language communities, as it will, I'm afraid, in Aotearoa, New Zealand. That does not mean we should not confront it, we should. In the case of the proposals in this paper, in my view, we can avoid that issue completely. We are not talking about signage here, we are talking about the naming of buildings and the names which appear in buildings. Buildings are big things. They've got 4 sides. It would be very, very easy. In fact, I would say there is no reason why te reo and English names cannot be put at exactly the same height, with neither name predominating in every single case. That would be a much better demonstration of partnership than having one above the other, which is always unacceptable to either group, depending on who ends up at the bottom. Therefore, Mr. Mayor, at an appropriate time, I do wish to move to propose a change to the paper, specifically that in the section bilingual name display, the first dot point is deleted and replaced completely by the wording that bilingual name signs on buildings should always be located at the same height and with neither predominant on all buildings. I appreciate we're not at a point in the debate where it's appropriate to make that amendment, I don't think, but the appropriate point, I would like to make that amendment.
Yep, we'll come to that. So, as a process,
Point of order.
Certainly.
Can I point out that our own standing orders mean that now that this particular notice of motion has been moved and seconded, it cannot be amended?
I'll take some advice from Michael about that.
So, apologies, Mr. Mayor, that is correct. It's been moved and seconded. It needs to be voted on now.
Thank you.
After the debate, obviously, but yes.
So in the standing orders that I'm reading on page 53, after the motion is seconded, it says the notice of intention to move an additional alternative motion needs to be foreshadowed. So that's what he's done. Yep. The motion moves through, and then if my colleagues don't want that paragraph in, then how do we amend that out as Thomas said? Bear with me as a legal opinion on this. Okay, so the legal opinion I'm getting from Michael is correct that after we've had the debate, Tom is able to move that amendment and we can then vote on it. Evelyn?
May I ask a point of clarification as to Kora Matua? When you spoke earlier, you indicated that Pania and I would be given, Ms. Kush and I, as mana whenua reps, would be given an opportunity to speak, but it sounded to me like it was after the debate had been held. No, now, I want that clarification.
No, I'll just clarify that for you. We were going to have a discussion now with Michael's input on the paper that staff have presented to this motion. Then we're going to have a general debate, and the first two speakers will be the two mana whenua reps. Okay. Then we'll have a general debate with the councillors' involvement.
E te whānau, tautoko ko haramana I tēnei rā ki te tautoko I te kaupapa hira mō tātou. Tuku mihi kia koutou mō koutou painga mō koutou tautoko I tēnei kaupapa. He taumaha tēnei kōrero ki au. I just thanked the people who came to support this because it's so important for us and it's a very painful conversation for us to be having.
Sure, appreciate that. Andrew.
Can we go back to, sorry.
That's all right, I thought you were finished.
So there's been a lot said today about different names and what they might mean and what this might mean for us going forward. As a person who has been intrinsically involved...
No, sorry, Reverend, I need to stop you there. This is not the place for this part of the debate. I need to allow the staff to give us the input first, then you get the chance to speak to that. We need to be informed by what the staff are telling us before we get into the general debate. Andrew.
It's predominantly Michael's paper. I just thought I'd stand here in case there's any questions
sorry.
Michael wanted to throw to me.
Thank you. Thank you, and tēnā koutou katoa. This paper, very briefly, as you can see from the paper being a very brief paper, simply introduces the guidance from Te Puna Kōkiri that in the event that staff were developing a policy, this is where we would turn to seek guidance and is therefore useful to inform the councillors in their debate on what staff would use as a starting point for any policy that we would develop to bring before you. And the paper is developed primarily for central government, but it is also designed to apply for all government agencies, which includes local government, and is also designed as a best practice guide for businesses who wish to go down the bilingual approach. With that, unless Andrew wants to add anything else, and I don't think there's much else I can add.
I didn't actually intend to say anything, but it was interesting listening to the submissions in the public part and some of the questioning. And I think, and this is the lawyer in me being analytical about this, there are more than one part to this question. And what is clear, and I think the Mayor touched on this to a certain extent, what is clear in that paper from the government and that you'll see coming through in road signage and where the dual language and what Tom referred to, it deals with that, however you want to describe it, the difficult question of ordering. And it is clear that the government, central government, through its powers and processes have dealt with that question. And that is one part of the question that you're considering today. And I think the guidance on that and the consistency around the country is very clear. The second part is this question of literal translations. And there are certain places and certain times where literal translation is the way that it occurs. We all know those. There's Kuru School, and you can see that coming through in the road signage. You can see that dealt with. There is then the third question, which was again being touched on here, where there may be a name that a literal translation does not work or is not appropriate. And I think it's important when considering, and we would consider, if you ask for us for a policy on this, those three different questions almost separately, because they are very different questions. And the partnership approach, the way you would approach that would be very different depending on what the question was. And so I think it's just worth bearing that in mind, because you can bundle all those things into one issue when they're all very different.
So Andrew, I have some, Michael, I have some questions for you. The document you quoted, which was from Te Puni Kōkiri, the foreword from the Minister of Maori Development, the Honourable Flavel. When I read through this document, I want just to note a few things.
But we actually have to start tonight with some breaking
Sorry.
news related to the special counsels and
Excuse me, Mayor, could you put the microphone closer to your mouth?
Sure.
Thank you.
So when I read through this document, which is one of three documents I might add, there was one back in 2003, the Maori Language Strategy, and the subsequent Auditor General's review of the public sector. It went to Parliament in 2009, which didn't show a very good uptake of signage, which I think Dean has alluded to. But when I read this document, it's clear to me that this talks about the government sector, not the local government sector. So that's the first thing. But all the way through, it talks about the visibility of te reo. And in my paper, I'm quite clear that I want more than we've got at the moment. I want to, wherever possible, have bilingual. Nowhere in this document does it refer to te reo and only te reo. So I just want to get that confirmation out of you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So that while the paper is primarily focused while the report from Te Puni Kōkiri is primarily focused at the government sector, the paper does, and the supporting document does say it is also for local government agencies.
Specifically on page 68.
Yeah.
In the strategic, what's it called? The strategic objective is the overall objective is developing bilingual signage guidelines to increase the visibility of te reo Māori in public spaces within the government, central and local, extending to business sectors. So that is there. I'm not otherwise going to dispute or make comment on your notice of motion, Mr. Mayor. That is your matter. As I said, the staff paper was simply for additional information for the councillors and yourself when you're making this decision on your notice of motion.
So I will now put to you a couple of the quotes from the Honourable Flavel in that document, because I think it's important that we understand when we come back to the issue of do we adopt this document straightforward or not. The Honourable Flavel says there needs to be more prominence and visibility in public information and services, which includes building signage. And it also addresses what is a bilingual sign. And I quote, "This policy does not require such information or publicity material to be produced bilingually. It helps to have an approach that will help make decisions." And it goes on further to say, good business practice is taking language equality will return you positive results to your organisation, which I support. And the very end says, Interestingly, that promotes both languages equally, but not a blend of both. So they were the major thrust was the issue of visibility and the issue of ensuring that we didn't have one at the expense of the other. And in my paper, I was already aware of these documents and I took those things into account. So I just want you to tell me whether I've got that wrong, because this document will become important, as Leslie has thrown up, if we want to adopt something else as opposed to the paper that I've put up.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. No, absolutely, that is the comments from Minister Flavel in his introductory comments.
Yep.
And I don't dispute that that is the intention of the paper. Again, I go back to, if staff were preparing a policy, this is where we would start from, because it is guidance from central government on how to approach with this. It's not to say that we have to adopt the Te Puni Kokore report as whole, unadulterated, but that's where we would start as a staff starting point for drafting.
Yep. And just as a final comment, and just please help me if I've got this wrong, the rules applying to bilingual language as an internationally recognised standard show that the first language and how important it is when you have a second language to make sure that you don't overemphasize one language, that one language, if it's longer than the other, should, as Tom said, sit alongside. And you don't have font that's larger in one and smaller than the other, because that minimises. And that only if that's not practical in the eyes of an easily reading person would you then have Maori text dominate. And I think that was advice given to council earlier on in the piece.
Indeed, and that is the commentary within the document, and it also aligns with guidance from the United Nations.
Sure, thank you.
So Andrew.
Yep.
And look, it's not our role to enter into this debate, but it is a debate around language. And again, the lawyer in me can't help but pick up, and it was touched on by Tom, the use of the word dominate, and that is implying and suggesting that the guidance promotes, through your questioning, that this guidance promotes a domination by an ordering preference. And I would caution against making that conclusion, let me put it that way.
Yep. Okay. Yep, questions for Michael or Andrew? Tom?
Michael, or Andrew, as I read this, and I did read this paper very carefully, and it's almost exactly the same as the Welsh language paper. I think it's been picked. It's not really about the Scottish or Irish one, it's a Welsh one. But the, I mean, I had in my mind as I was reading that we were not talking about notice boards or pamphlets, but we were talking about buildings. And the advice in the paper is that wherever possible, the two languages should be given equal status, which I took to be meaning side by side. Now, I think we go down a rabbit hole when we start to visualise pamphlets and signs and so forth, because that's actually not what we're talking about. We're talking about the naming of buildings and how that name should appear on the buildings, which can always be side by side and which in no way conflicts with anything that Te Puni Kokore are advising. Would that not be the case? Turning into a question.
It really goes to and that's why I said there's three separate and distinct questions here. What you're really talking about and leaving silent is the order. And so to answer your question, this paper deals clearly with the ordering on a building in terms of which one's on the left, which one's on the right. It doesn't deal with anything else other than to say they should both be the same size, font, otherwise. But you're leaving silent the bit that it does deal with. Does it deal with whether that's an exact translation or a gifted name or no? But it deals with the ordering question. The guidance deals.
But my question, Chair, I mean, my question was that isn't it the case that the Te Puni Kokore paper recommends that wherever possible they should be given equal prominence? It's only where there is not enough room that you find that they do recommend that Te Reo appears above the other one, same as in Wales.
It's not only above, it's left to right And in that
case, I'm not talking about left or right. I'm talking about one above the t'other. I don't think left or right matters.
You're right. It's only if there's not room for left or right from both to run next to each other.
So the point I'm making is that we're going down a rabbit hole by debating something we don't need to debate. We're talking here about the names and buildings, and the name and buildings can easily be put side by side without even having to debate or argue about whether we put one above the t'other or which one should dominate. And I don't think that's in any way conflicts with Te Puni Kōkiri's paper.
Yeah, Tom, might I just clarify though, but one issue about naming a building is that on the correspondence that we put out as a council, we then refer to that building. Yes. So you have to be mindful that when you put out rate bills or when you put out consultation papers where people might be asked to direct to come to the building, you want them to know where that building is. So hence my English first and Te Reo second, which is in my paper. Andrew said not left to right, but my paper clearly does say left to right. And I'm open to removing the top to bottom. Yep. Any other questions for either staff member? Leslie. Oh, sorry, Pania. No, Pania first.
Kia ora. So you spoke about earlier around your paper and everything and noted all the highlights, but what I actually want to say that is in conflict with that paper from TPK if you read it in more depth. So what I firstly want to sort of highlight is that it doesn't remove metaphors, which your paper does. Yep. And our language is built on metaphors.
Yep.
The other thing I want to sort of note as well is that there is a bilingual design. And so within that paper, there's a design tips. And I just want to briefly read them quickly. Had the font for the Māori text at least as large as the font for the English, even if one text runs longer. Use an equal typeface for Māori and English. Use the same font style for Māori and English. Apply colour coding to text and language, separating background panels. Be consistent in all signs with the same colour and positioning of each language. Also place Māori first, either stacked or side by side. If both Māori and English cannot be easily read because the signage is visibly busy, consider having the Māori only. So this is totally opposite to some of what you have actually within your paper.
Correct. So that wasn't a question for one of the two staff members, but I'll take that on board what you said, and I will respond to it. Because one of the primary focuses of a building is not necessarily to promote te reo. Primary response of a building is to direct people to the building and what the building provides. So, in my view, is that should be the primary indicator of where people are going to. If you have a metaphorical term, which Tom said he didn't agree with, but you've said you do agree with, and so did Dean as well. If you have that, then you confuse the nature of the building if you have that as the primary left to right configuration. But that's okay. I mean, you probably need to come back to that when we have the debate shortly.
Absolutely.
Leslie and Evelyn, questions for the staff?
Thank you. I want to start by also quoting from some of what the Minister said in the preamble to this paper, because I think that's important, and then ask my question of Andrew and Michael.
Surely.
So I'll quote where the Minister said, "You are in a position of influence to make a difference for te reo Māori, to make it visible, to make it normal. The guide was informed by the experiences of countries where bilingual signage is also part of the language revitalisation to encourage good practice. Through the new Māori Language Act," and I'll remind everybody that in 2016 the original Māori Language Act was updated to include some new clauses about the encouragement that could be given for the revitalisation of te reo Māori. Through the new Māori Language Act and the development of the Mahi Ka Runa, the government is committed to enhancing the support for te reo Māori revitalisation by all agencies as a normal part of the way we do business. One way in which we will achieve this is to ensure Te Reo Māori is more visible to the communities we work in. Yes, Te Reo Māori is the official language of New Zealand, but it is also more than that because it belongs to no other country but ours. A beautiful language, your language, our language. Further into that document, which I'll remind you from what I've read, is also very much about the encouragement of the revitalisation of the Māori language in the way that the Welsh language was revitalised. There is a very clear statement that says things about the placement on the equal signs that are being talked about, including the signs on buildings. And it makes it very clear that the placing of the first language, that is the language you are trying to revitalise, should be placed first. That is in a stacked sequence, Māori at the top, English below. In a left to right sequence, Māori on the left, English on the right. The document then talks about other ways in which you can differentiate the two languages so that people's eyes are led, if they wish, to one or other of the languages as the primary. But in the revitalisation of language, it is quite clear, and this is my question to Michael and to Andrew, in my reading of the document, it is quite clear that the placement question, the order, is supremely important in the revitalisation of the language, and that is what we are talking about today. We are not just talking about the bilingual naming of our buildings, we are talking about the global issue of the revitalisation of a language, a taonga that we hold dear.
Just in response to that, Councillor Soper, I believe that the document is a multifaceted document with a number of aims, including, as its forefront purpose, is the revitalisation of Te Reo Māori in government, business, but it covers a number of different aspects, as has been highlighted already today.
Andrew, did you have any comments?
Same comment. It's clearly that was part of the thinking behind the rationale, and as the Mayor alluded to and Tom alluded to, it's consistent with the approach taken around the world for those purposes, to ensure that the language is, look, and in summary it makes the point that, picking up Councillor Stewart's point, if you only understand English, your eye will quickly jump to the English, and you'll see that, and so it's putting it on the left promotes the understanding and the desire to understand the other language, and that's why it's done that way. That's the strategic purpose.
Thank you.
Evelyn.
Tēnā koe. So to Mr. Cameron and Mr. Morris, I just want to draw your attention to the Mahi Korona, which is the 2019-2023 Language Revitalisation Strategy, which supports the 2016. And were you aware of that, and will that be used in designing any future policies should we be given the opportunity?
I'll probably touch on that one. Because of the nature of the notice of motion, this is not a, whilst you can't help but touch on the revitalisation question, the notice of motion is not asking council to adopt a strategy for revitalisation. So this document stands alone and separate from those strategies as a guide for government informed by the strategy, including local council, which is informed by the strategy, but is not, it doesn't require council to adopt a strategy to promote Maori to adopt this approach, which is consistent with the rest of the country. If you were asking council, or if the notice of motion dealt with a strategy for council to promote, that's a different question, and that's why. But yes, we are aware of the updated strategy.
So the fact that the strategy talks about visibility, the sound, the use, that all those things as being the positive, that would add to the richness of our city, and therefore, and should we then not as council be being avid adopters, because it's something that would actually add to how people see us, promote us, if you like, as an inclusive and welcoming place.
A subtly different question, which is not for me to answer, to be honest.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Trish.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the Mayor for having the courage to bring this to this table. We want to make sure that we do adopt a bilingual approach. It's really important. Can I ask you, Michael, or Andrew, whoever it is, if we accept this motion, does that mean that the recommended processes, we accept those as well? Or can there be discussion further on that? Can we accept the motion and then come back to the detail, which is what we're talking about now?
So the notice of motion, as it is, sets out what is proposed by the Mayor to happen. As part of that, there can be policy work done in behind it, which is the detail I think you're alluding to.
Yes.
But the notice of motion would set a resolution and set where council's direction is going.
Yeah, I think the question was asked by Councillor Pottinger before. The paper would adopt effectively that process behind it. We might be able to tweak within that process, but to the extent that that process says one thing, we couldn't go against it. So to the extent that that process, for instance, and I'm not trying to be inflammatory here, but calls out no metaphorical names, we would not be able to adopt a metaphorical name under a process consistent with that resolution.
So how could we then add what Councillor Campbell has suggested, that we change that first point?
That is through the amendment process to the motion, which can occur after the debate. Once the motion is ready for after that debate, once the motion is ready, Councillor Campbell can then propose his motion. He's already foreshadowed that he is going to do that.
Thank you.
Other questions for the staff? There being none. So I get to speak again to the motion before we start opening it up for the debate to be led to the two mana whenua reps. And it's just probably a statement for Tom, who's the seconder for this. Would you be open to, as was suggested by Trish, the motion, being mindful that the motion requires bilingual names on all buildings where possible, and that the attached paper could be developed at a later stage to give some meaning to some of the debate that we've had today? Is that something you'd be open to?
Yes, sure.
Sure. Okay. So
I'm sorry, but could you clarify what you mean by that statement?
Well, I think Trish threw up the idea that we could approach, as a council, a bilingual approach to any naming or renaming of civic buildings, and that the naming shall be expressed in a dual manner. How we actually do that, which is the issue of, is it top to bottom, is it left to right, which take prominence over the other, given that that seems to be an area of concern, could be developed on a paper later on with staff input and mana whenua input if that was required. That would give a little bit more meat to that motion.
So you're therefore proposing that the notice of motion would be altered to put a full stop after dual manner? Correct.
Well, that's what I was asking Tom, whether he was open to that. We, around the table, can have some discussion about that.
Well, Tom's foreshadowed a different amendment.
Yep.
So, Tom, are you foreshadowing that you would put up that amendment?
Yeah, okay. We're in due process and you're losing me a little bit. But look, I think what the Mayor is proposing is, I mean, it's almost a matter of laying on the table, is it not? Because it's taking it away and doing some more work on it. My proposal was to change a single dot point. It may be that if it was taken away and brought back, it might be that there's several dot points that might be reworded. So, and that there might be more comfort around the table around that. So I'm going to be guided by process in this because it's not clear to me just where we are. I mean, I'm comfortable putting my motion, which would remove that above and below and replace it with side by side. However, the mayor's motion to take it away, and I think you don't know if you used the word rework, but that's how I would interpret it, might give a better outcome. So in balance, I think I would support what the mayor has said. If I'm in the right place in the...
So, for a general debate, Evelyn or Pania?
Tēnā koutou katoa. E te kura matua. You have laid the challenge before us, so the first thing, leaving aside what any changes may be made by yourself or the seconder of the motion, I think it's only fair that we should say the things that we have been thinking about since this notice of motion came to our attention. The first thing is the prominence of English is a de facto prominence. It's not actually a de jure language of New Zealand. It is a de facto language of New Zealand. The two de jure languages of New Zealand are Te Reo, which happened in 1987, and New Zealand Sign, which happened in 2006. I think in all of this, that point has been lost. English became the dominant language by the importation in the 19th century of hundreds of thousands of people who only spoke, or mostly only spoke one language, and that was English. It was further given dominance by an oppressive and suppressive language strategy undertaken by agents of the Crown. Leaving that aside, there's some things in here in what has been said that are factually incorrect. Runaka have never asked to affirm or veto common practice words such as tāne and wahine. Never. I have been asked as part of signage, what is common practice? Common practice is tāne, wahine and universal sign, because everybody, no matter what language, looks at somebody that is wearing trousers and interprets that as male, and somebody that is wearing a skirt as being female. We'll leave aside cultural differences from countries where neither clothing is worn. So put that away. He Wakatuia Art and Museum is named in large letters all along the building, which means it can be read either way. Depending on what angle you approach the building from, depends on whether you see Art and Museum first or He Wakatuia. However, He Wakatuia has been the branding. It has a meaning. It was a name that was gifted. We were asked to gift that name, and we did. In your document, you talk about the heritage of this place as being European, Scottish, and mana whenua. Now, I spoke to one of our whānau. I'm sure she wouldn't mind if I said what her name is. Keri Milne Ihimaira, who is a direct descendant of John Kelly in Hinetu, Hawaii. Her tupuna was around about 13 or 14 years old when they came to live in the city, or what became the city. The right to be here came because Hinetu, Hawaii was Tū Hawaii's sister. Never let it be forgotten that there were children living here of Māori heritage before there was ever a non-Māori child born to John Kelly and Mrs. Niven. The stories that we have been given you as part of the cultural narrative of the city are all to do with these place names, the importance of the food sources that were here at the time these people came. It's what actually made it possible for settlers to settle here. The fact that the estuary was rich in food, the fact that the river was rich in food, the fact that Tauraki Te Waru had plenty of trees, that Otarewa had plenty of trees. This is what made living here possible. in 1856 without a supermarket, a refrigerator, or electricity. The place names that we have given you, like Tahinaki, actually directly connect to a strategy that you made in May 2022, which included the naming of the buildings. Someone give me some water, please. The meeting rooms in this building. So you use names of taonga species that come out of this book. The Ngaitahu Claims Settlement Act, 1998. Those names, tuna, kuaro, pokapū, weka, etc., talk about food resources that were here, that the early settlers utilised to keep themselves alive until another ship came. So a hinaki was really important. That is how you caught tuna. If you were careful where you put it, you might actually get a pātiki or whatever as well, but that was irrelevant. This is what you were going for. You were looking for nourishment. The name Tahinaki was given because this building is proximate to Otapuni, to Otarewa, those places. Thank you. We did not find it out of fresh air. It talks about the gathering of resources for the well-being of the people. That is what this building does. It gathers resources for the well-being of every citizen. It brings us together as people, as we are today, to help us understand one another better. To come to a place where instead of being in conflict, we find some mutual meeting ground. And that's part of the narrative that we have been telling. So as you walk along Esk Street and you see the tuna, and you see the hau, and you see the huamanu, and you see the pātiki, the kina and the pawa, and the weka that's running away with the bootlace, it all tells the story of what this place was like before we changed it forever. It's not accidental that we're telling those stories. When we placed Mana Whenua, when we placed the beautiful woman outside one of the main entrances of ICL, she's facing towards her companion piece, who is in Don Street, who is called Mahika Kai, because that is part of this. It is the 9th tall tree of the Ngaitahu settlement. It talks about how vital our food resources were to us way back then, and what we would like them to still be right now. In this document, the Crown's first words, apart from saying what the Act is in Te Reo Māori. He kōrero tuatahi. Tautai. Oh God, I can't even say. English becomes secondary in this explanation, as it is in the apology from the Crown to us. This is because of the law of contra preferentum, which is part of the Treaty of Waitangi, which is why the Māori version is the preferred version. It's international law. I find it really sad that we're being asked to make our language less than it can be, that the examples that we are going to show to people are less than the full richness because it makes some people uncomfortable. The metaphors, the oratory of our people are in the names that we give. He Waka Tuia is about uniting and weaving together. And it was weaving, at that time, weaving together art and museum, because neither place had a home. That was what that is about. We've talked about Tahinaki. Te Unua, which is the other contentious name. A voyaging double-hulled waka. It holds two different peoples, it holds two different contexts, it holds art and museum or history and the present, all those dualities that we can create in that building, exploring together a future in a new place, in a new space. to reduce all these things to I don't understand it or I don't like it or I'm uncomfortable with it is doing the mana whenua of this place a disservice. As been said, we've been here for more than 800 years. If you look at where our place names are, I think Tom must feel very at home in the inner city with all the Scottish river names. Some of our people will feel a little bit more comfortable as they go out and they find Victoria Avenue and Thames Street and all those sorts of things. How far do you have to go as a Māori person to find a street name that talks to you? You could go to Otatara, there's quite a few there, or you could go to the far-flung suburbs. You could go to Vaikavi, one of the sole surviving traditional names of this place that is here, that in Otatara. Lest you be like the person who keeps going and blocking out the macrons on Otatara on the signs going out there. E te kura matua, I ask you to reconsider what you have put in this paper. It is divisive. It divides this table for a start, never mind the wider community. But more than that, it speaks to me of a great disrespect for the beauty of the reo that we're raising our tamariki mokopuna within. What we want them to see, what we want them to hear, what we want them to experience. You're also denying our presence. And I'm sorry that we're only 4% of the population, but we're multi-billionaires, and I think that that is important to acknowledge as well, because we have done that by working really hard with the resources that come out of this. We have done it by being entrepreneurial. We have done it by our language strategy, kotahi mano kaika, 1,000 homes speaking te reo. The Crown's document talks about 1 million homes in 2040. Compared to our percentage of the population, 1,000 homes by 2025 is a much higher aspiration. May we see this reflected in the city where I was born, where I grew up, where I was educated, where I raised my child, and where I hope that my mokopuna will one day be proud to stand and celebrate the beautiful legacy that we have left on the face of the city. And finally, can I remind you, e te kura matua, that the Eve Pool Library is the Eve Pool Library to Haiata, and that was made long before I had any influence at the table. Can we celebrate these things? Can we rejoice in these things? And can we please not do this ever, ever again?
Pania, you want to contribute?
Kia ora. First of all, I want to acknowledge our whānau, our rangatira here today. Thank you for coming and for supporting in regard to this I don't know what to call it actually, to be honest. I'm just a bit disappointed, I suppose, when I read the paper in the first place. I don't know how many times that we have to say around this table that literally in the first half of the 19th century, you know, Māori, te reo Māori was the first language, and both non-Māori and Māori could speak it. It's just sad that the second, you know, when we talk about the second half of the 20th century, that almost our culture and our language was destroyed or stripped from us, is probably the nice way. And it's sad now that in this current times, we have been reclaiming our culture and our language. But on the other hand, I'm you know, I agree totally with my colleague over there around where we have been and with everyone that has spoken in the public forum today. I suppose what I just want to add is I hope that we can revisit and reshape your notice of motion on the table, because it does not meet or feel right when we talk about community concerns in your paper. What about the concerns from Māori? You know, there is no partnership whatsoever in this paper. even around the proposed recommendations and process, this is totally concerning that we're not reflected or part of that discussion. I know that we don't have a vote here today, and I realise that that we're here and really hoping that the councillors actually take our concerns on board in making the final decision. And I do have to also say I do support what you had said right from the beginning, Councillor Soper, that maybe that motion in accordance with the TPK paper or the Crown strategy for Māori language revitalisation would be more appropriate to alignment than the Mayor's paper.
Darren.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. I think I'll start with something light before I dive into the meat. I saw a meme recently of somebody holding up a teddy bear, and it said, "You show me on the doll where today I hurt you."
I don't.
That wasn't me, that was it?
No, no, it wasn't. No. I think it's unfortunate that the discussion we're having at the moment comes at a time when things are emotionally charged. And they're emotionally charged around some of the co-governance discussions that have been going on in the community. I'm not touching that with a 10-foot barge pole because we need to focus on this. And I think we're starting to head in the right direction. I want to make sure that we're creating a city that values the use of te reo Māori. I'm not able to kōrero fluent in te reo. I have a basic understanding. My youngest son gave me a couple of books last year for my birthday, Scotty Morrison's books on how to learn to speak in te reo. Said, "Come on, Dad, catch up." And I love him for that, because it's a great challenge. And you know, we went out to consult with the youth of our community a couple of months ago, which I think was a really good thing to do. And actually, if you think about where the youth are now, that's a space that they're already in. And it's up to us to catch up. It is difficult and challenging and confronting sometimes. I come at the end of the age of the cultural repression that was going on through our education system, and didn't know any better until you go on your own voyage of self-discovery. But the young people are there already, and I've had some pretty clear feedback from them over the last week and over the last couple of days. But they are there. My son went to work and greeted a customer with kia ora, got a kia ora back, and "Kei te pēha koe?" His response, "Kei te pai, kei te nono." He had to explain it to me because I knew most of it. "I'm tired." "Oh, okay, fine." This is the space that kids are in, the young people. This is the community that they want. If we talk about partnerships, I live in a partnership. Where my wife and I have discussions about things before I decide to agree with her, because more often than not she's right. But partnerships are an alongside thing, and that's the journey on life that she and I go through. Very lucky. And I'm supporting an approach that looks at bilingual equal signage. But I think what many people don't understand is that te reo Māori is a language of metaphor. And that sometimes those things don't translate. And you know what? That's no different to many of the languages through Europe. I can think of a German translation that in German means something completely different to what is being used elsewhere. And it's not unique. So we want, I think most of us, to ensure that the revival of te reo Māori is reflected. I think the document from Te Puni Kokiri is a really good starting place. But as the motion stands, I can't support it because it talks down the metaphorical use of language. And that's at the heart of it. We don't necessarily need to understand the metaphor. It's being open to understanding it. It might come, it might not. That's fine. Te Papa Tongariro, our place. I've always mentioned Te Papa first. I don't say I'm going to our place while we're in Wellington or the National Museum, but it's just, it's become bigger than it needs to be, and it really upsets me. You know, we've all had plenty of approaches over the last short while, and, you know, our emotions are probably heightened coming into today. But I'm interested in supporting a motion that gives equal status, sees things side by side, values the use of te reo Māori, recognises the partnership, and understands that there are differences between our languages. And in some cases our way of life, and in some cases our values. But that's the beauty of it. That's what we've got that nobody else has, anywhere else in the world. So I understand that the motion may change. There will be amendments. I will watch very closely to see where they go, but that's where I'm sitting at the moment. I want to see bilingual building signage in our city, and if it means more work on a paper to refine that, that's a good thing. But I want to see us more than anything value that relationship, because there's a bit of damage that needs to be patched up. Kia ora, thank you.
Leslie.
Thank you. I'll also start in a slightly roundabout way. I want to say, as the sole surviving councillor who worked for 2 years to create and fund Hei Wakatuia Art Plus Museum, as an interim solution to the closure of both the Southern Museum and Art Gallery and the Invercargill Public Art Gallery, that we spent a great deal of time weaving together two organisations who had separate identities and had not worked together before. Hei Wakatuia, the boat that carries us all. That was the perfect metaphor for what we were creating. In Hei Wakatuia, we were creating until 1225 as a reality, a chance for our taonga to be seen, because we were having a venue that was open for the display of both museum and art. We were delivering art and museum together. We were saying, yes, you still have access to your public collections, to the history and the stories, and to the variety of art endeavours. Hei Wakatuia, the boat that carries us all. You look at that Art Plus Museum now, and as has already been pointed out, depending on the direction from which you approach, you see either Hei Wakatuia or Art Plus Museum first. Choose what is best for you, but acknowledge that both those terms have an important part in the reality of what we created there as an interim transition space for the treasures of this place. And that's what we wanted to achieve. The boat that carries us all, for me, was the perfect metaphor to describe what we were creating there. Moving to the actual notice of motion, and I have to talk to the notice of motion as it is currently moved, and its associated paper. I'm saddened that we have this notice of motion and the associated paper here today. I'd be ashamed if I didn't speak against adopting it as it currently stands. To me, the notice of motion as it currently stands, with the attached paper to be accepted as a whole, is taking us back 50 plus years in New Zealand history. Taking us back to a New Zealand where I grew up, where the grandparents and sometimes the parents of the people I went to school with had Māori beaten out of them in their classrooms. To a New Zealand that was unable to accept that we had a covenant between peoples called Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And remember, it had not been that long a time before that legally the treaty had been called a simple nullity. We were quite late in the piece in 1975, coming to the point where we had a Treaty of Waitangi Act that gave Te Tiriti a legal place in our firmament. Taking us back to a place where Te Reo was not an official language, it now is. It deserves our respect, our protection, and our obligation as part of the revival of Te Reo Māori. And that is the wider context in which we are looking at what is before us today. The motion as it stands and the attached paper, to me, is coming from a place of fear of positive change, misunderstanding of New Zealand's unique history, and New Zealand's changing demographic. And thank you to every one of you who has come today, and your children, who, as Councillor Ludlow has already pointed out, are the future, who have already accepted the place of the normalisation of Te Reo in New Zealand, who are already there. We want to make sure that this council is also there at the end of this discussion. I want to point out that we have the chance to do a great deal as a council to assist the revitalisation of Te Reo, to make a principled point about the bilingual naming of our buildings, about bilingual signage. But if we are going to adopt an attached paper that says incorrectly that some buildings have an unequal focus on Te Reo and uses the example of Hei Wakatuia, that talks about unease ongoing in our community, when all the unease I have heard in the last few days to me is unease about the notice of motion actually being passed in its current form with the associated paper saying what it does, with a paper that suggests that metaphorical names in Te Reo should never be adopted, when we know that is the essence of Te Reo Māori and is of extreme importance to the names we have been gifted, that implies in the additional paper that somehow Runaka have tried to gift us names we did not ask for. Every name, every Te Reo name we have been gifted is because we asked our Runaka to gift us the name. And yes, they all came to us with consultation. And yes, last year we did adopt some fairly powerful and, I thought, decisive words about what we believed about the importance of Te Reo Māori and how it could play a part in this council's going forward. Yes, I am horrified at the idea that we would adopt an additional paper that suggests English version should be displayed first, given the very small number of Te Reo speakers. What message does that send, and what is the point of having that message there when we are trying not to divide but to come together? And then the additional paper goes down to the question of fonts and differentiation, perhaps by using italics. Well, I'm sorry, but the guidelines in the Tuna Kokori paper do have things to say about the use of italics for differentiation, for instance, the use of unequal size of fonts, the use of colour, the need for some standardisation and for some actual thought to go into what is produced. I'm sorry, but I cannot vote for the notice of motion as it currently stands. I did try to ask early in this conversation that we replace in accordance with the attached paper to in accordance with the Māori English bilingual signage guidelines as already in at agenda today, because I think they are a very productive and reasonable way to move forward. But I cannot accept that we would adopt today, without my strong protest, a notice of motion and an associated paper that divides rather than brings together. Thank you.
Grant.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I support the bilingual approach to naming buildings as well. There's a couple of things I've noted. Dean, your comment around the First Nations thing, I think that's something we really need to take into account in terms of the prioritisation of the naming. I think that's a really important point you've made there, and I think we should give that consideration. It's reinforced in the Te Puna Kōkiri paper. So the other piece I think I see is an opportunity for us to take this moment and walk forward together. And I'd like to accept Cyril's invitation to come down and, you know, have a hui or an argument. You know, because I think it's, you know, I'd like to see that while we might use the Te Puna Kōkiri paper as a guide, I'd like to see if there's any opportunity for us to build in unique references or protocols that reflect our whānau in terms of mirahiku. So I think we need to take that opportunity as well. So look, I think the approach that we're getting towards around, you know, we need to accept that we want to take a bilingual approach, I can support, but I equally think we need to redefine the process we will take to get to the point we need to get to, which brings us together. And so that's the approach I'm supporting, whichever way that looks.
Thank you. Trish.
I absolutely agree with you, Grant. I think we are moving forward. We do want a bilingual approach. We will be known as a council who try to make a difference, and we mean it for the best reasons. With the associated paper now, it doesn't seem to be what we all want, or whether we need to have further discussion. So I, in essence, would agree with it, but not as it currently stands. I do believe that we are moving the right way.
Tom.
Chair, not being an expert at all on process, but it does seem to me that this is not the sort of forum where a fairly complicated issue around, you know, detailed wording is going to be resolved, and therefore, you know, in my view, by whoever means that's done, I would be inclined to leave this motion on the table and go and do some more work on it.
I'll come back to that in a minute. Others who want to speak? Go on.
I agree with Tom.
You what? You agree with Tom?
And Grant as well.
Yep. So, Tom, being that you and I are the movers and seconder of this motion, I just want to run something past you to see whether we can get some common ground. If the paper, the motion took out the words after dual manner, which is sitting up there, so it takes away the attached paper, and we insert a second part to it, which says that that this bilingual approach will be supported by a paper that gets developed in the future. So that allows people that have different views to come into the play. Would that suit?
Well, I think the part of the paper that everybody would be agreed upon would be the first sentence, wouldn't it?
Sure.
That we, the council adopt a bilingual approach to any naming and renaming of civic buildings, and that naming shall be an expression of idioma. I don't know how far I go before I put a full stop.
Sure.
But I certainly would be surprised if there was anybody in this room that would disagree with that first sentence.
Sure.
So I think that we ought to be able to move and resolve that. Second part, well, how then do you develop a protocol for that? I guess I haven't quite thought it through in my mind, but I think it needs to be taken away. So I think that it may be that we simply resolve number one, and number two when it gets reworded. That council develops a paper. To support the bilingual approach.
So that allows us to go to the different parties that are here today.
Yeah. So I would personally support that motion as it now reads.
Yeah.
Just those two sentences. Just the two sentences. Yeah.
So I'm prepared to amend accordingly, unless I have some objection from around the table.
No objection, Mayor Clark. I just wonder whether just to put a little bit more detail, that council develops a paper to support the bilingual approach, taking into account the 2016 Te Puna Kokore paper and consultation with the 4 Runaka.
Chair, I would support the second part of that, but not the first part of that.
The 2 Runaka
sentence.
So again, Leslie, from my perspective, I'd be happy with the consultation with Runaka. That's not an issue for me. I don't want to tie us to a document that is actually a government document and it relates predominantly to the public service. Now, whether that comes into the discussion when we go to talk to Runaka or anybody else, that's fine, but I think that boxes us in too far.
Yeah. Just to have it as a resource and place things on.
To be frank, Chair, I think the more words that you write in that sentence, the more divisive it's going to be. I mean, I would prefer just have a full stop after that. I mean, clearly it's going to involve consultation with the 4 Runaka. Clearly it's going to include thinking about the Te Puna Kokore paper. Clearly it's also going to consider the later paper that Evelyn referred to.
Sure.
So I think a full stop after, frankly, just a full stop after bilingual approach. And then consultation around it, no problem with that.
That is the option that was proposed by the Mayor.
Yeah.
No, you need to just...
Okay. So, any further discussion on those two motions? There being none. All right, put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Yep. No, that's for the voting public. Carried.
Thank you.
And as a final gesture, councillors, we just need to formally accept the paper that came from staff, which is what's referred to there as in 12.2.
Yep.
Barry, Trish, all those in favour? Carried.
Aye.
Thank you. I think it might be helpful to have a 5-minute break now if you want to, because we've got a whole lot more work to do. major late item that we have to acknowledge, which is the minutes of the Finance and Projects meeting held on the 20th of June. Thank you, Grant, for putting that up. Darren?
That it's accepted.
Yeah, Darren, thank you.
Where are we?
Leslie, that's your cue.
Yeah, right.
Yep, I already did.
Oh, sorry.
I would if I could.
It's a far one.
Now, or do we?
No, you've just received it and we'll do the video.
Okay, excellent. We've done that then. Right, the order. Is it the first one? Okay, the first one we've got to deal with is the minutes of the meeting of the Bluff Committee Board held on the 22nd of May. Grant, thank you.
Yep.
Leslie, again, thank you. Any discussion around that? No. There being none, all those in favour?
Aye.
Carried. Minutes of the Risk and Assurance Committee held on the 23rd of May.
Move.
Leslie, thank you.
Yep.
Darren, by default, thank you. All those in favour?
Aye.
Carried. Minutes of the extraordinary meeting of the Finance and Projects Committee held on the 23rd of May. Grant, thank you.
Yep.
Yes.
Darren, thank you. All those in favour?
Aye.
Carried. Minutes of the council meeting held on the 23rd of May.
Move.
Trish, you got a hand up?
Yep.
Just
I'll move.
get you on the record. Thank you, Trish. Barry, thank you. Any discussion? There being none. Oh, there are?
Yep.
Certainly.
So just 39 of board books around the CCTV project. So we've got next steps, but have we got that project actually in the PMO? Like, have we got a management plan around how we're delivering that and timeframes and that sort of thing? Someone from...
Yep. So
Yeah,
I might ask Rangi to contribute to that, or Leslie, both in there. Just before I do, I just want to acknowledge that I do get a lot of community feedback about the urgency of getting those CCTVs
hence
in,
the question.
and that's come from ICL and from the police as well. So Leslie, you're on that, aren't you? Or Rangi,
Yes,
either or?
I am, but Erin may have a...
Defaulting to Erin, thank you.
So it's on the infrastructure agenda.
Yeah, it's page 39
We're
of
still
board
on
book.
council.
Oh, are we?
What?
We're still in the council minutes.
Yeah, you're the wrong minute.
Next one.
Yeah.
Okay, just on the council meeting then.
The council 135.
Minutes held on the 23rd of May. We've got a mover and seconder. All those in favour?
Aye.
Carried.
Sorry.
Thank you for that, Michael.
Move the infrastructure.
Yeah, thank you.
Second.
No, sorry. Darren always runs with Leslie. Seconded.
I do no running of the sort.
I'm not sure that's quite
Yeah.
we would put it.
So,
Not elegant.
so coming back to your issue, Grant, Erin.
Yes, so happy to speak to that. In terms of next steps, we spoke, or the message at the last meeting was around the fact that there was a brief update given, but I'd also advised Councillor Pottinger that we would bring a full report update on exactly where the project was at and timelines to the Infrastructure Committee meeting in 2 weeks' time.
Okay, right. Rangi.
This morning, after, look, I've had a lot of phone calls from the public, and I sent an email to Russell Pearson, who's leading this, and just requesting, do you have any further update on the completion of the network design and tendering for this phase of work? Unfortunately, the news that ICC is putting a CCTV system in has people asking for completion and use dates. It's been 9 months now involving the process. So far in June, there has been 20 vehicle theft burnouts. Public pressure is becoming very anxious. It is probably time that the Infrastructure Committee starts laying out a proper timeline for what comes next.
Okay.
So I've asked for that this morning.
As I said before, I've had the police ask me. I've had the community patrols ask me. ICL have asked as well. A lot of petty crime going on around the city.
So can I ask,
spray painting as well.
Yeah, for Erin, through the chair, would it be reasonable that we're at that stage now, we can have a timeline?
I will just need to, definitely a timeline. It's just in terms of exactly, I think we're still narrowing down exactly some of that detail because we're working through those network issues. But it will definitely be coming back with reasonable chunks of that timeline. There just may be some finer detail that we can't include.
It's amazing. It's good that the public interest, but unfortunately, the pressure as people are wanting it like yesterday.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, it's yeah.
But you've only been raising it for 6 years.
8. But
Oh, sorry.
I'm not fussy.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, great.
And to give some context to that, so last night at the Bluff Community Board meeting, we raised the fact that, we do need CCT down there, because if you look at what's happening down on the point with those windows being, the glass areas being smashed, that costs about $100,000 every time that's done. So, and that's just one example in our community where it's actually costing our community until we make them safe.
Sure.
And so we've got to have absolute urgency about getting this delivered. And also there's a bit of credibility. We've talked about it, we've proved it. Yep. We've got to get it delivered.
Yep. I think Aaron's got the message.
Yeah.
Yep. So we also have on there, as part of our accepting this infrastructure committee set of minutes, is a recommendation that 700,000 be committed to the additional alternative water supply. Correct. Any discussion around that?
No, we've got to have that water supply.
We do.
Yeah.
Yep, that's one of the things that came out of the recent expo on renewable energy from some of the people that are wanting to be in our community by way of economic development and need to be able to secure a water supply. That doesn't mean they get enough water. It means that there is security around the water supply, that we're not at risk with Branksome.
Yeah, I'll move that way.
Yep, thank you.
Second.
Seconded, Peter. Yep, all those in favour?
Aye.
Carried, thank you. Moving on as we are. Minutes of the Community Wellbeing Committee.
Move the receipt.
And seconded by Leslie.
Seconded.
Thank you. Any discussion? There being none. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Carried. Minutes of the hearing of Code of Practice for Subdivision Land Use and Development. Now, this is a very long document, but we have had a workshop before on it.
Not only have we had a workshop, but we've actually had a hearing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I second that.
So I'll move the two motions.
The two motions?
Well, that we
Accept and the Code of Practice.
receive the recommendation.
Yep,
and,
thank you.
Yep.
A second for that. Oh, Trish, thank you. Any discussion about that?
Yep.
Lengthy document that it is.
Okay.
Oh, Grant, yes,
so
thank you.
just around the process, and I sat in that as an observer, and look, I think it was a really great process that where we actually engaged with industry to get their feedback and try and evolve a way forward that works really well for them but meets our needs. And I think, we've got to take out of that, and we're seeing it on the 1225 project around how we're tendering and contracting people to work with us. There's a real partnership approach. We've heard it here today. And I think we've got to look wider into our business and look at, some of our infrastructure projects, for example, around how we look at our process to try and get more engagement with the industry prior to the awarding of the contract, so we can learn from them, because they're the experts. And it came through very clearly in that hearing that these people are experts in this field, and the committee and the hearing panel, took on board what they thought. I think there's a really good message and lesson and opportunity in that for us in some of the other parts of our governance and process.
Thank you.
Barry, did you?
No.
No. Okay. We've got a mover and a seconder. All those in favour?
Aye.
Carried. Adoption of the 2023-24 annual plan. Patricia. Welcome to you too.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you. So this paper brings forward the annual plan for the next financial year, building on all of the preparatory work that Council's undertaken. The key points to note are the proposed rate increase of 5.67%, which is marginally above that forecast at the time of the last annual plan, primarily as a result of inflation and interest rate changes, which have had a combined effect across both the operational and capital programs. The annual plan report, document itself outlines in detail all the variations to year 3 of the long-term plan, noting those changes within the capital program particularly. But I think the key message to be taken out is that based on the direction of this council, the annual plan has worked to respond to the cost of living challenge, and as such there is some adjustments that have been made within the area of the funding for Three Waters, and that's the primary change other than inflation and interest rates.
So just as a reflection of that, two things for me. I guess the 5 point, whatever it was also impacted by the movement in the minimum wage by government. So acknowledging that is that increase that we had over the previous figure, which we set as 5%, is good justification. And a credit to the people that did the paperwork and the exercise behind the scene, which is the ELT team, that we started out this journey with about 20% at one stage. And to be aware, the position we're at is an excellent result. When you consider what other councils are putting up, we will be in the very, very bottom cluster of increases. And we've taken a little bit of service delivery flack for some of the stuff that we've had to trim back on, but that's a good, healthy process by my way of thinking. So thank you for that. Any other discussions? Tom?
Well, that's not a question, I guess it is a comment, Chair. I do think that this is a excellent document. I mean, the huge amount of work that's gone in to keep the proposed rates increase to the level that it is. If we had gone any further, we would have been cutting muscle rather than fat. But you know, in terms both of the work of the officers and I think in terms of the work of we as a council, I think we've arrived at probably the best place that we could.
Thank you for that. Any other comments, team?
Yeah, I just
Peter,
want to
yes?
repeat what other people have
sorry,
said.
Grant.
As you said, like 6 months ago, we were warned over 6 months ago that there would be an increase of 20%. Well, and you look at where we've cut it down to, and Tom said it. You know, I'd like to congratulate the staff, the chairman of finance. Staff put in a great effort to get it down to an acceptable level, mainly for the elderly and the people that don't have much income. It'd be a great relief to them when you're looking around at other councils in the South Island, you know, up into double figures. So a big thanks to our staff. Thank you, Your Worship.
Oh, sorry, Grant.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just 110 on board books. Just with respect to the comment around increased income from ICL, with their discussions last week and their decision, is that
That is still how we've prepared it on that basis, on that assumption.
with that taken into account?
No.
Okay, so that
We
will,
had it prepared before that.
right. Okay, thank you.
Any further discussions? Okay, we've got three motions there. Receive the report, adopt the annual plan, and delegate to the acting group manager, finance and insurance, the ability to make any minor, very minor, corrections to the annual plan as required. All those, sorry. Oh, yeah, I've got Leslie and Trish, thank you. All those in favour?
Aye.
Carried.
Yep.
Okay, we've got settling rates for the year 20. That's must be a bit of a typo, is it? 2023-24.
So now that we have adopted the annual plan, it's time to set the rates for the 23-24 year. So this is the rates setting from 1 July 2023.
Which is very soon.
Which is very soon. So this is a standard, it is a very long resolution, and it will go over multiple pages because we are required to set each of the rates separately. You can take it as one, but it will set out each of the differential categories, and I think this gives us that 5.67 across the board increase. And other than that, I can take any questions.
I'll
So-
move the 4 recommendations.
You'll move the four ones. A seconder. Yeah, thank you, Leslie. Just some questions for you, Patricia, before we move on that. I wasn't here at the last full council meeting, but I noticed that Rodney Tribe raised a long list of issues in relation to rates, these rates. And I'm not sure where that actually went to. He was talking about dog rates and commercial water rates and other things. Did we get to any position where we went beyond just hearing what he had to say?
That was, if I recall rightly, in relation to the hearings on the annual plan.
Yeah.
Fees and
It was one of the submissions he made.
Submissions on fees and charges.
Yeah.
So we did factor into account potentially what he said, or took into account what he said?
And setting the fees and charges issues.
Okay, thank you. All right, any further discussion? Being none, all those in favour?
Aye.
Carried. Item 15, the long-term plan pre-engagement and process update.
So this paper outlines the results or the feedback gained through the pre-engagement campaign, and also provides some update on the process itself. The report forms a summary of the issues raised during the pre-engagement. All of the types of pre-engagement that were undertaken are noted on page 172. I'll just note that there are a few still to conclude. We're still working through engagement process with Matawaka, and so the results of that korero will be brought forward to council in due course, and with age concern as well. But you'll see that we had a broad range of connection with the community, and many of you were at some or all of those sessions. This paper provides a summary. I think in common with many of these types of engagement within the long-term plan, there are a very broad range of issues that are raised by the community. All of the feedback received is attached as an appendix. I've drawn out some of the main themes into the report itself. This is really an opportunity for yourselves as decision makers just to reflect on the korero that you've heard from the community and the stage that we're at in the process. I would suggest, with a few things in mind, we are now kind of moving into the activity and budget setting stage of the long-term plan. So it's good, I think, to have some of the themes that have been brought forward by the community kind of in your minds as we're moving through that process. It's a chance to reflect on the extent to which you feel there's any divergence between what the community is saying and what the discussions around this table have been. And then thirdly, to look for any possibly things that have been entirely missed by council. So in that sort of reflection, I would note a few opinions of myself, I guess, in having been involved in many of those korero. I think, first of all, when we were out and about in the community at the stands at various events, my sense was that there was quite a different energy compared to a few years ago, that there was a broad feeling of positivity amongst the community, that particularly the city centre streets work and the work and decisions that have been made around Project 1225, there's a sense that they can see that there's some progress being made by council. There's a different tenor to the conversation. I think that also the very broad range of issues raised by the community largely reflect the conversations that you have been having around the table. Some of those themes that were drawn out that you can see in the paper, such as housing, such as the needs of youth, mental health issues, the cost of living, are things that you have discussed many times around the table. There will of course be different areas of reflection from the community that you can draw out, but I think it is really worth, and hopefully you will be able to take the time just to look into the broad range of feedback and use that and utilise that in your decision making going forward. There will of course be later in the long-term plan process the formal consultation stage where you'll present the actual options to the community for decision. So this is an interim engagement. The other things to note in terms of the process, we're just proposing a change in timing to the strategic projects workshop. That's to enable particularly the workflow within the urban play project to be a little bit further along in order for that phasing and budgeting conversation to happen. This report also provides some further background information on community engagement coming up on Surrey Park Grandstand and on the Bluff Active Recreation Precinct, which was discussed yesterday at the Bluff Community Board. Also provides a recommendation for you to consider again whether a development contributions policy is a useful step forward. And finally, just to note that the LTP process is well on schedule. I think we're making really good progress in terms of delivering key outcomes. There, as ever, of course, do remain risks to delivery of the process, but I think that they are all in hand at this stage. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah, Rangi.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Look, the workshops I thought were fantastic, and the feeling was really good. But the thing that's troubling me is that we seem to be in tune with our community. Unfortunately, it's central government that doesn't seem to be in tune with us. And what I want to quote is from yesterday, we had a WasteNet meeting, and the MFE were online to do a presentation on the impending compulsory curbside collection of food scraps. Now, during our workshop, everyone was really keen on getting back to growing stuff, composting, doing that. And I suggested that to the two gentlemen from the MFE, and they said, "Oh, no one does that. That you can't be doing that." You know, and I said that there'd be a lot of ratepayers who do this, who don't want to be paying a rate for a collection that's something they don't get, and so their reason was obviously to save the planet with our food scraps. So I think we're going to have serious talks there, because when I look at the rate of $236 per household for the collections in that previous item, that is going to be, and if we want to do glass as well, this is going to get out of control a wee bit. And so this paper here tells us it's going to be compulsory, and unfortunately it's not in line with what we want to do or our community wants to do.
Yeah, I sat in on that meeting as well, and I found it very frustrating that we didn't get much detail out on. There's a lot of dates in the future, but not a lot of traction going forward in some ways. Oh, Barry.
Yeah, as far as the meetings we had in here, the pre-engagement things, there was a lot of talk about having public hubs, like community hubs, down south out in Invercargill. And is there anything going to be done about that, or we just got to sort it out?
So through you, Chair, Council at the time of the last long-term plan determined to support the Saving Grace project, which was to the value of $100,000. I think that the topic of community hubs has been coming up more frequently as this report does draw out. So you're absolutely right, Councillor, on that. And I think that it will be a topic of further consideration later in the LTP process in relation to the allocation of external funding.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine.
And I can just comment to that, Barry. I mean, I've been quite public about the fact that I think that as a council we need to start thinking about further investment in the South City, given that the Decile 9.
We've got a bank that's closed.
And if you put aside the fact that we've got the museum underway and we might have some work potentially for an art gallery, I think before we start doing a whole lot more in the inner city, we need to be casting our eyes down south as well.
Exactly.
Evelyn. Oh, sorry, I missed you, Grant.
That's right.
No, just further to what Councillor Pottinger was saying about the waste collection and the desire for some of us to have glass collection and waste, compostable waste collection. is it that we should also be looking at discouraging everybody putting out their yellow bin, whether they need to or not, and things like that? Because I've noticed myself, if I make a conscious effort, I actually only need to put it out perhaps once every 6 weeks, and maybe it's how we schedule the collection. That actually, although we've got to buy, the smaller bins for the other materials, which would be a cost, and they would have to be collected, but if we actually started looking at what that takes out of what we put in the other waste streams, and whether we are able to reduce the number of times we collect our red bin, the number of times we do other things, perhaps that might equal out. And it's a bit of lateral thinking, because I think we want to be encouraging this sort of planning in the long-term plan, but again, it's probably my personal ambition to see us do waste differently rather than the same old and just add on cost. Encourage people to do things differently.
So I just might reflect on that, Evelyn. I think you're quite right. From my observation, our whole waste management, waste minimisation area is a disaster at the moment. Rangi's smirking away, so he doesn't normally agree with me on these sort of things, but it's terrible. It really is. We're not coordinated in any shape or form. We do have to get the glass out. If we leave the glass in one bin, it interferes with it breaks up in transit and interferes with their ability to recycle. If we put it in the other bin, it just adds weight to what goes over the weighbridge, which just increases our costs. So we need to find a solution to that waste glass thing. Grant, sorry.
Yeah, I agree around the waste. Couple of 3 things just to summarise for everyone. Firstly, how many people do you think we've engaged with over the thing, just as a rough guess? 2,000?
I would say probably not as many as 2,000.
No.
I can't give you an exact number. There wasn't a quantitative engagement on this occasion.
And congratulations to the staff who got involved in it, because
it's pretty cool.
I know you're passionate about it, and it's a really important piece of what we do. I think there's 3 themes for me. It's safety and community, particularly around the cameras. Let him go, he's fine. Parks and Rec.
Might be a spy.
Someone clean the windows. Oh.
No, sorry, Grant. That was engineered by Jonathan, just to reinforce that we need to seal the windows. It's all going to drip through in a few minutes.
That wasn't.
That's that $16 million pitch that's coming.
It's heart attack material there.
Yeah. Sorry, Grant.
There you're right. And the importance of parks and recs and mental health, I think that comes through really, really strongly, and it's a signal to we need to get our parks and rec strategy really robust and make that a key to our long-term plan. And then economic development. Youth Council seem a little bit confused about what that might be, but there's a number of times that it's mentioned, particularly in the raw feedback around, the affordability of things. Well, the only way through that is economic development. We can't do it through subsidy. So we're going to have to really push hard into those areas.
But again, Grant, just as a reflection, because we've had a lot of discussion around the economic development that faces the city, but it's hinged on housing, and it's hinged on the security of water, not necessarily the volume, and it's hinged on the security of electricity as well, which is not the supply but the longevity of it. So these are, from what I've seen, are quite complex issues. It's a chicken and egg situation. You can't have one without the other. So we've got some real work to do. Pania.
My one is just really to go back to what Ian and as well as everyone was sort of referring to around the disposal of wastage and things like that. So I suppose something that I didn't see in this was probably around what we had talked about earlier, and having doing a staged approach probably, or doing something rather than doing nothing, around having a depot or somewhere that people could actually drop glass off.
We had some discussion about that at the waste net.
But that's sort of not.
One of the dilemmas we have is that's commonly used in small communities. So the district representatives were talking about that. They have large bins out because it's just not cost effective to pick up. because they get small amounts and they have to cart them a long way. So there's all that carbon emission stuff as well. But we need to take wholesale some of the stuff out. It's really not good for us. So even if we got a third of it out, Rangi will tell you some of the pictures we've seen recently of what comes into the recycling plant. It's just horrible. And the broken shards of glass, it doesn't take many glass to get above the level that the international people just don't take our cardboard or paper.
Yeah, so rather than doing nothing, it's like...
Well, we're actually not doing nothing, unfortunately. This is the glass thing, because it's going to be an increased level of service. It's going to be included in the LTP. And when it comes to us, it's going to come with costings for a bin system, but it'll also come with the opportunity for alternatives.
Yes.
So that's the thing, is you look at the costs and go, separate bin, fortnightly pickup. Nah.
I'd rather drop it off at a depot.
And same with other things, So.
And there was some potential at that meeting that we might be able to get the bins sourced through the ministry.
Yeah.
That was a potential too. They mentioned that, which was nice.
Bin Laden's.
Yeah, Rhiannon.
So just to note that feedback on waste amongst other environmental issues from the community is on page 181 of the report in the appendix, and also that the next workshop on activities, one of those activities will be solid waste, where the opportunity to really discuss all these issues in detail.
So it would be helpful as we go forward into the long-term plan if you can just prompt us on the feedback you've been getting in this process as we go in, because it's very easy to forget what the community have said to us.
Yep.
That'd be great.
Can do.
Any further discussion? Great, there's been none. So I'd like to move all 6 recommendations. Barry, Leslie, thank you. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Carried. Left the best to last. I would. Welcome, Hendrik.
Thank you.
A very long future for local government report.
Yes, and I think as the paper suggests, this is very early on in the piece, and there's nothing that you need to do immediately, but it's highlighting and further developing our risk maturity that a lot of these have big strategic implications, and there's 3 of these reforms going on. Not only do they have strategic implications for yourself, but they have implications for staff, which feed into staff wellbeing, and we're seeing the impacts of that with the continued sort of delay and uncertainty around things like what is now affordable waters. And so it's an opportunity for council to consider how it wants to approach some of these changes, what it wants to try and do, whether it wants to try and be proactive, reactive, what the headspace is like. Obviously knowing that there is a great deal of uncertainty around these things, how we want to try and manage that uncertainty to take advantage of what may or may not occur. I think it's also quite useful that it feeds on from the last paper that you had, because I think over the last few years council has, whether knowingly or unknowingly, responded quite well to those changes, and so the increased emphasis around wellbeing and those items in the current planning process reflect very much the changing focus that is coming through in this paper around where council should be focusing their priorities. And so to a certain extent council is already pivoting the way this paper would force you to go, but it's just how much you want to engage in that, how much you want to sit back, which bits you may want to engage in. It's just a matter for council to consider.
Yep. So give you some feedback on that as an opening discussion. My preference is for option 1 to do nothing, and the rationale for that is that the report talks about a 5-year plan, implementation plan. The first 2 years are the government developing policy and development, and I think for us to jump in ahead of that would be unwise. It creates work for our staff and potentially for a staff team, as your report says, that might be undone by other developments that come down the track. Certainly, till we know what's happening in the election, would be a good thing to have. It talks about potential for 5 unitary authorities, and at best that's a Southern authority, but at worst it could be an Otago Southern authority. And if it was the larger of the two, I mean, I just can't get my mind around how we would have a council that covered Otago South, and which is really a population-based type model, where in fact we've got the geographical issue of Southern District to resolve as well. And so I think there's an awful lot of water to go under the bridge yet, and I wouldn't be too keen to get too involved with that. Certainly not to establish a team yet. My preference, I guess, which may not be what you're looking for here, is just to leave this on the table till after the election, and then come back to get a clearer picture on what we might want to go to. But I think regardless of which government we end up with, I think both of them will need a year or two to decide where they want to go, I guess, with this around unitary authorities or other. The other option they gave us which was a bit of an overarching council over and above the existing councils, which I think would be totally unworkable. But yep, so it was my preference. Tom.
I mean, I guess we're not here to talk about the recommendations overall, Chair, so I'm not going to get into that. It's whether we should do anything today, and I agree with your view that, you know, if you don't know where you're going, then any road will take you there.
Yep.
As a metaphor I always like. And the reality is that we don't know whether government would pick up all of these recommendations or make a smorgasbord of it and pick up some of them and leave others behind or do nothing. Yep. I mean, we just don't know. So I think I'm in favour of option one, except that if you look at the actual published material, there is recommendations on page 120 and 121 of that, of things that councils could get on with doing now.
Sure.
And when I read those, actually, I think it's actually quite a good list. I think they are things we're already doing by and large.
Yep.
And on page 322.
322 on both.
322 in both papers. I think mainly a lot of them are things we're doing now. So I think it might be worth just sort of mapping those recommendations against things that we already have in plan or things that already got underway. Because I think there's a lot of good stuff in that. I think it's 12 recommendations.
It was interesting when I talked to Jim Palmer, who was on more than one occasion the chair of that review panel. He told me that the issue of amalgamation was not one of the terms of reference from government. So when I hear people say, oh, they've been very bold in their recommendations, I think they've just jumped outside their terms of reference. The Minister has been very clear that nothing will be implemented before the election. Nothing. So we won't have a clear picture on what they want going forward till at least after the election. And I'm not sure, given the fact that they didn't have in the terms of reference the issue of amalgamation or unitary authorities or anything, whether he or she would actually have any stomach for that anyway. I'm not sure. Evelyn.
I can see some benefit in us doing a stock take of where we're at compared to the recommendations, even irrespective of whether these initiatives go forward, because I think it reminds us where we are at, and sometimes we don't actually really know where we're at in relation to what current thinking is. But I do think, as having gone to one of the panel, is that they've clearly gotten signals as they've been out going around areas about things like amalgamations, and they can see where the wind is going just as well as any of the rest of us. So I think for us to say that they went outside their brief, that may have been what the government or whoever said that they should do, but in actual fact, the fact that they saw that there was a need to initiate the discussion and put it in a document like this is not necessarily a bad thing. I think we need to look at all of these things as helping us grow in our understanding and get it, when the time comes to make these and have hard conversations, we're a bit better informed and we've had a time to actually explore what all the options and what all the pros and cons are. And for that, I think this amount of provocative thinking is probably not necessarily a bad thing.
So just as I got your ring, just as a reflection on that, one of the things that came out of the local government conference recently was, regardless of what we want to do, which is what we've been prompted to sort of get on the front foot, at the end of the day, the call is made by the local government commission. they've previously had councils, especially in the Wairarapa area, 4 small councils that wanted to combine, and twice they've been knocked back by just saying they don't agree with it. So us doing too much front foot work at this stage, I guess, is a bit of an issue, Rangi.
This is my opinion, and it's a wee bit different to any of the recommendations you've got there. I thought the report was very superficial and failed to address really the elephant in the room, which is the vast gap between the current localism versus centralism in this country. And that's what that does. It creates the imbalance of responsibility and access to taxpayer funding. The late Dave Cole was trying to remedy this, but unfortunately passed away. I mean, the document touches briefly on a better collaboration between local and central government and setting up believe this or not, setting up a new government department to take care of this. I mean, that's
got to be better than DIA.
Oh, we just need a new department to tell us the time. That's fantastic. What the report needed to do was to expand its scope and actually look at the governance roles of both central and local government, and then establish what the best balance is. And, you know, it's like, I can't believe central government is sort of sitting there doing this. It's like, I guess a turkey's never going to ask for an early Christmas, you know, so they won't want to review their own nest. And that's the problem, is that, you know, we've got a country of 5 million, and look, a better governance structure so that the money can be spread out. Now, Three Waters is a problem that was created by centralism versus localism. No money, so that created the problem. So my option would be, and since people said it's early in the piece, is to write to them and say, do it again. Politely.
Yeah, it's an interesting issue that you raise. I asked Jim Palmer again over a coffee without committing him too much, you know, what was driving the centralisation versus decentralisation, and why was the government, and it's not specific to Labor, I think it's just the government, whoever the government are not keen to get into these larger unity councils, potentially 15 or 20. I'm like, he wouldn't tell me, but I told him, and he was allowed to smile if I got it right. And I said, well, if you had 15 super councils in New Zealand, why would you need 60 electorate MPs? And he said, yep, got it right on the button. So I guess there's some water to go under the bridge yet, I guess. Grant, I think, was next on the...
Yeah, thanks, Jed. Just firstly, Councillor Podger, I don't know whether I'm surprised or confused that you'd think anything really, really poignant would come out of central government or this sort of paper, so don't hold out too much hope. In saying that, I think Tom's suggestion around adopting those 12 points as a reflection point for us to compare our long-term plan.
I think stock take was the word that Evelyn used. That's probably a better word, actually.
Yeah, well, stock take then, and I support, you know, option 2A. We don't do anything except use those bullet points to reflect on what we've got in our plans.
And I suppose just to address that, that's really, I think, where we were thinking in terms of 2B. It's not go out and change what we're doing, but have a look at where we are. What if this was enacted, what would we need to change? What would be inconsistent with those changes that we might be doing, just so it's highlighted and flagged, so that, not that we change anything, but so we're aware, okay, you've taken this path. If these reforms come in place, that path will have to change. That's really what we're talking, and that encompasses those 12 steps, because that's the sort of things that we'd be looking at.
Trish.
With Three Waters, we saw the amount of effort that took for staff to get to present and then to have it hang. I would be loath to ask staff to put any effort into this. I would rather that they got the new museum art gallery sussed or something. I think something that, you know, I hate to see their time wasted on not wasted, but spent on this when we could do it on something else that was more relevant to where we're at.
So just point of clarification for me, Andrew. So between options 1 and 2, if there was a desire from elected members to do nothing but do a stock take, as Evelyn said, would that come under 1 or 2?
I would put that under 2. That's the sort of thing that we were anticipating. We're
With,
just
with 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where are we sitting? What's it saying?
Okay.
If you're going to pre-act, yeah.
Yep. Okay. Any further discussion?
Well, yeah, so just to clarify, so doing nothing except using that page 322 as a stock take for us to reflect on.
Yeah.
Versus, and to Trish's point, and I think it's a well-made point, asking staff to come back with a report, which is going to take their resource and effort.
Sure.
Well, in my view, it's pretty clear. We're going to do nothing except use that as a stock take page to be able to reflect on my things. So we don't need any more reports. Why waste any more staff time at this point?
Yep. So just fleshing that out a little bit. So what you're saying is we do nothing, but acknowledge that the pages you're quoting as our current position.
Sure, Chair. I mean, as we think about those 12 things on that page, I think it would be appropriate to at least, make a few notes about where we sit against them.
Okay.
Now, whether you call that a report or not, I don't know. And without wanting to, give a busy Anne more work, it does seem to me that if you look at the LTP and work in hand, you'd be fairly easy, I think, Rihanna, to say, yep, you can tick that box, we can tick that box. I mean, we haven't really done anything in that area. I think it'd be worth doing a stock take to that extent, and that probably would result in a report of sorts. But we're not talking about a huge document. We're talking about a page,
All right.
Well, I think if you could take Andrew's cell phone off him, we could probably get him to do it.
What's he going to do with it?
Leslie.
I was just going to say I'm inclined to think that doing absolutely nothing is not quite what we want to do. So I am quite inclined to say we should do a perhaps lighter than we would normally do 2B, to at least have some reflection, bearing in mind that we don't want to overload staff. But it just seems not the best idea to completely leave it as a do nothing.
I can give you some comfort. We're not looking for work. It would only, if we had time, we could have done a high level report for this, but we just didn't have time between when this was released. Yeah, we thought it was important that it be on the table. It will not be extensive.
So Rihanna could do it over a weekend, you're suggesting? Yeah. I'm up for that.
Saturday night, probably.
I think we might be thinking of a reasonably long number of weeks.
Safer than skiing.
Alan.
Yeah, I'm just sort of thinking, look, the way we're talking here is, I mean, it sounds to me like everybody's talking about the option of doing nothing. And if that other thing is just a measuring thing, then it's just business as usual, because we're already doing those things. So there's no work required, I'd be thinking. Just carry on as we are and do option 1, do nothing, because we're already doing some of those things that we're measuring against. But that's just what we do. We're not doing it for any particular purpose. It's just what we do. So why would we change what we do if we're doing okay?
But maybe identify the gaps. Maybe you say, well, we've got 10 boxes covered, but we've done nothing in these 2 areas.
Yeah.
I think that'd be worth looking at.
Well, we don't know what's going to happen. Seriously, we don't till after October. And then it's going to take a year or two, like Nobby said.
Okay, so I'll make it easy for the voting purposes. When we get to 2, I'll just put up option 2. And Andrew's heard the message about a very, very lightweight reflection of what's happening on that page that you referred to. And we'll just see how the vote goes on that. So I'll move recommendation, or somebody can move recommendations 1, 3 and 4. Barry. Darren, thank you. All those in favour? Aye. In relation to 2,
Yes.
Sorry?
I'm voting yes, receiving it. I reckon the report is substandard, so I'm actually voting against.
Okay, we'll have that recorded. Thank you, Ringy. And in relation to number 2, I'll put up the motion for option 2, a seconder. Barry.
2A.
You mean 2B?
Oh, geez, I've lost it now. Where are we? Oh, sorry, 2B. 2B, sorry. Yeah. All those in favour of 2B?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? 1, 2. 2 only. 2B is carried.
Or not to be.
Yeah, or not to be.
Would you like that recorded? Not worried.
You escaped likely, Andrew. All right, anything else?
Send an email saying do it again. It's like high school.
Councillor
You know, you can
Ludlow's
climb through it. Do it again.
Okay, the last one in public is this draft statement of intent for Southland Museum and Art Gallery Trust.
Kia ora everybody, as you know, each year we have to do a statement of intent for all of our CCOs. This is the very last one for the Southland Museum and Art Gallery Trust Board Incorporated. It was adopted, so it was initially proposed, and then we withdrew the paper when we identified that there were a number of deficiencies in the statement of intent itself. So have taken that opportunity to reflect it and actually try and make it something that's useful for the incoming trustees of the trust board. There are two recommendations there, and one of them is simply to ask the board that it confirms the draft statement of intent meets its requirements for non-financial performance targets. That's a standard request of all CCOs. Outside of that, happy to take any questions or other directions.
You're away. Yes. Thanks, Rangi.
Move the two recommendations.
Yep. Thank you, Sarah. Leslie, any discussion? No, being none. Do you want to get away? And Tom,
No,
do you?
it's sorted, thanks. And
Oh,
he's
sorted?
okay. So
Yep. Okay. She's okay.
the dog was getting an operation. That was
Yep. Excellent.
Extremely serious.
So no discussion around that. I'll put that to the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Carried.
Now, actual last one, sorry.
He lied to me.
I did, I apologise.
The minutes of the Finance and Projects Committee dated the 20th of June. Thank you.
Yep.
Grant. Alan, thank you. All right. And it has two parts to it. Two parts to it. All those in favour?
Aye.
Carried. So we now need to move into public excluded.
Yeah, I'll move.
Take it read that you've thank you, Leslie. Take it read that you've seen all the reasons for going in.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Indeed.
Live streaming gone. Going.